Hi, good afternoon. I want to thank you for joining Celerity and joining me. I'm Ann Palmer. I'm on Celerity's team on the new business side, and part of my work is that I get to meet leaders like Brandon and Gabrielle. Today I'm joined by Brandon Baldassari. He's the head of sales for Jaguar Land Rover North America. Brandon, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then my other guest is Gabrielle. So Brandon, tell us a little bit more.
Thanks, Ann. Appreciate you having me. Excited to be here. Just a quick snapshot of who I am. I was born and raised in Virginia, and right out of high school, I joined the Navy, spent 5 years on a submarine. And then after the Navy, I went to Drexel University. So I spent some time in Philly. And then I kind of been in the car business ever since. So I worked for Mannheim Auto Auction. I worked for Subaru for 6 years. While I was with them, I did a lot of sort of brand management, marketing research, product marketing, new product launches. I was part of the marketing team when we launched Love Campaign. So if you're familiar with Subaru's advertising, they still run the Love Campaign. It's been over a decade, and they've still maintained the consistency of the Love Campaign. Great company, great products, great team there. And then, but I've been with Jaguar Land Rover now for over 8 years. And also did a lot of marketing here. So again, some more product launches, brand management, a lot of dealer marketing, retail marketing. And then I went over to the UK and I spent a couple years in the UK working at the global HQ. And now I've been back for a couple years now and in this sales role. So currently head of sales operations based out of Mahwah, New Jersey.
Got it. And joining you is Gabrielle Cassani. Gabrielle, our paths crossed, I would say maybe like 6 months ago. Your background was super interesting. And so I reached out, and it's been such a pleasure to get to know you. Can you tell everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you've done?
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And so, Gabriel Cassani here in Florida. We were just talking about the weather here. And so today we're hot, not stormy. Born in Belgium, but I've been in Florida the whole time. In Florida, pretty much, working for hospitality industry and spending time in customer data, CRM, loyalty, digital analytics for Disney, Universal. Spent some time with Silversea Cruise on the luxury side, then Darden Restaurants, then on the automotive side, which I know is what we're going to talk about primarily on the automotive side with BMW. And now I've started the customer studio, really focusing on customer data, customer experience, and those components. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about the automotive industry and about the way that the customer experience, the buying journey has been disrupted. For audience, I love your questions. We'll work them in. So as they come up, please feel free to engage. We're going to do a deep dive into innovation disruption, like EVs, online retail, and the sales of vehicles. This is an industry that has been doing more with less in a rapidly changing landscape. At Celerity, we work with companies that are going through a lot of change under the thesis of a responsive enterprise. So responding to customers and their journeys, to the operations that support that, and to how quickly you're able to deal with change. So I wanted to tee up the conversation with a quote from McKinsey. I'm going to read it to you so I get it right. Today's economies are dramatically changing, triggered by development in emerging markets and the accelerated rise of new technologies, sustainability policies, and changing customer preferences around ownership. Digitization, increasing automation, and new business models have revolutionized other industries, and automotive is no exception. So there are some technology-driven trends that we're going to look at: diverse mobility, autonomous driving, electrification, and connectivity. Over the last year, can you both paint me a picture of the automotive industry, the impact for your clients? What was most surprising? Brandon, I'll start with you.
Yeah, last year was absolutely crazy. We shut down our factories in March. They were shut down basically, March, April, May. We kind of just sent everyone home and basically froze all spending because nobody knew what to expect. And of course, we transitioned to a work from home. And then sort of in May, we sort of realized that auto sales were sort of going through this very rapid V-shaped recovery. And then the rest of the year, we sort of spent scrambling to restart spending, but doing it in a very controlled manner, because we all kept hearing about the second spike of infections that was going to come in the fall, which of course did happen. And we really didn't know how that was going to play out. And then, on top of coronavirus, of course, you had protests and riots last year, due to the murder of George Floyd. You had a presidential election, which sucked up a lot of air in the room, and also causes, anytime there's a presidential election, that causes media prices to rise. So right when you need to start re-advertising again, to get the brand out there, all of your media costs just went through the roof. So I guess between the pandemic, the civil unrest, this bitterly divisive election, we just had a lot of concerns about our business last year. It was really difficult to predict how things were going to shake out in the luxury auto space, just because of all those external headwinds. And, the conventional wisdom that would be that those things would have put a damper on luxury automotive demand, but it really didn't, quite frankly, because the stock market, despite everything else, the stock market was just going through the roof last year, and that luxury auto sales and the S&P 500 are really closely correlated, and that held true last year. We really saw fantastic demand despite everything that was going on.
I saw that, in fact, it was on the Today Show, I think yesterday, that used car and truck prices are up 45% and demand exceeds supply. Gabriel, any thoughts over the last year and the crazy demand around vehicles right now?
You talked to used cars, and I think what's interesting with that, and Brandon was talking about the pandemic, it introduced a whole new audience into the marketplace. And I think that kind of helped create the urgency for focusing on experience again, because they've come in with different sets of expectations from auto manufacturers and just dealers in general, and what they expect from the industry. And so I think that was probably one of the interesting things to observe from last year, the previous year, just the influx of people into the marketplace, which is what's driving up the used car prices. That demand is there. So that's a very interesting thing.
So I have my own story. I have a new to me 2019 vehicle sitting in my driveway. I can see it. And I bought that through Carvana. It was triggered because, Gabrielle, I want to talk about this. BMW sent me a note that said, your car I had an X1, it's getting up there in mileage. So connecting the dots and data, and this is what I want to hear from you. That was like, oh yeah, it is getting kind of old, and I would like to replace it. But then I kind of turned to Carvana and the online buying experience. So Carvana, like they said, rolled up with the car on the back of the truck, rolled it off, took my old one away. It was a pretty easy buying experience. How is the dealer network responding to the changes in buyer preferences? And Gabrielle, can you talk about connecting the dots behind the scenes for customers?
I think that dynamic that you just went through is going to be an interesting one for a lot of just what's going to happen in automotive, just because of the data and how you use it, right? And how you use it to actually trigger the action that they wanted. I'm sure the action they wanted was, you're going to bring your X1 back to a BMW and buy a brand new BMW. In Brandon's case, go buy, a Land Rover or a Jaguar, as far as those components. But that dynamic of these new players that are selling these cars that are new to you, but still amazing vehicles, it is going to create, I think, some challenges to the marketplace. But I mean, we've had conversations with Brandon. They're working on strategies as far as how to address those, because I mean, obviously, selling new cars is still very, very important, and there's people who want new vehicles, right? And so I think the demand's going to be there for forever, honestly.
Brandon, can you talk a little bit about that buyer journey?
Yeah, I mean, last year, because of the pandemic, we quickly realized, and retailers quickly realized, that contactless handovers and deliveries and contactless, sales were like all of a sudden super important, which is really just buying a car online, right? It's really just digital retailing. And so all of our retailers rather, it very quickly went out into the marketplace. And there's a ton of these companies out there that are doing really cool stuff. Companies like Roadster and AutoFi and Darwin and all these companies, another great company is called Digital Motors. All these companies are already out there, and they had products ready to go that are sort of plug and play that can bolt right into the digital experience. So when you go to the retailer's website and you find a piece of inventory that you really like, you can start that buying process right from that piece of inventory, right off that car, that individual car. You can start that buying journey. And some of these tools are super sophisticated, where you can apply for financing, value your trade-in, et cetera. And you can get a quote that's, perfect down to the pound or pence, or, in America, down to the dollar, right? And that's the kind of stuff that wasn't possible before, because automotive transactions are not clean and simple. It's not like buying a widget off Amazon. There's a ton of implications of, like I said, your trade-in, your financing, your credit score. And it's really hard to get a dollar perfect payment quoted online without a ton of work and systems integration in the back. But these companies have done it. I mean, you're a great testimonial for Carvana and how they've sort of revolutionized used car buying. I mean, I think most people thought when the internet came out, when people started having websites, dealers started having websites like in 2000 or whatever, that one day people would buy a car online, but nobody's really jumped over that until sort of recently, really, and sort of Carvana and Vroom and CarMax too. CarMax is doing a great job selling cars online. But so really, I flip it back to you too, Anne, is like, now that you've done that and you've sort of, once the dam is broken and you've bought a car without ever test driving it, I mean, are you ever going to go back to a dealership?
Well, funny enough, my brother works at a dealership, manages the service side of things. So the one thing that I did after I bought the car on Carvana was took it to the dealer, to my brother, to say, what do you think? And so I do think there's still a really human part of, at least for me, of the buying journey that couldn't necessarily be totally disintermediated by technology. I want to ask more about innovation in automotive. I see Ilario has asked a couple questions here, but the continuing digitization of design, and how does that accelerate innovation between automakers and innovators? How is that connectivity happening? Either one of you with thoughts there?
I mean, from an automaker standpoint, I mean, one of the things that we're constantly trying to figure out is where to prioritize our dollars and our investments. And, we have a venture capital, a lot of OEMs now have venture capital companies that are separate standalone units that are just there to invest and place bets on these companies that are coming along, that are doing these crazy things that are going to transform whatever it is, whether it's car ownership or mobility or whatever. And I think there's just too much out there for car companies to sort of figure it out, which is why they've set up these venture capital firms to take investments in these things. And I think all the car companies have probably been burned by trying to develop too much of this stuff in-house. And so there's definitely a mindset currently in the industry, which is, we're going to sort of sit back on the sidelines. And when there's a third party player who's developed something that's really strong or looks like it has a ton of potential, then we're going to jump into the game and perhaps try to partner with them or bring them into the fold, versus trying to sort of develop that sort of technology and insights in-house.
That makes sense. Gabriel, any thoughts on innovation?
Brandon, you made the perfect point, and I was going to say that was probably the one with the venture capitalists and third parties, right? Just having someone else use the capital time, I think time and energy as well, because there's so much to focus on automotive. It is changing, right? We just talked about the buying process changing, and it's on used cars, but that creates expectations on new cars. So that's a focus and things that the automotive world needs to really figure out, honestly, on that sales process. So they can't take their energy away from figuring that one out and getting that one right, to figure out what's going to be the next bet in automotive and mobility. And my time at BMW was impressive, just seeing companies that organization was talking to figure out where's automotive going. That obviously they're being they're being pioneers. And so to Brandon's point, it allowed BMW almost at times to say, we're going to be aggressive, but we don't have to go and be the most aggressive. We can rely on partners out there that are trying things that we're just not capable of doing, and not capability as far as skill set, just capability as far as focus. There's so many things to focus on.
Let's address Kurt's question here with connected car technology. That gives opportunities with owner data. What kind, and actually, Gabrielle, I want you to answer this question too, but from the lens of your other experience. We'll start with Brandon. What data has the most impact or influence on the car sales process?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kurt. We have not. I would say we're still in the beginning stages of using the connected car data to sort of change any of our sort of go-to-market strategy. I will say we are using connected car data from a service marketing and service messaging standpoint. So obviously now we know when your car is due for an oil change or when the brakes need to be changed, because that data is getting pinged up to the cloud, and we're able to look at that and then develop campaigns, service action campaigns to target customers who have had that notification, sort of service due soon light on their dash for 3 months and still haven't set an appointment with the retailer. So we have that level of data, and we can sort of start to market that from the after sales and service side. On the new car sales side, though, some of the, in terms of data that's impacting the sales process, there's a bunch of companies, but the best one out there, frankly, is a company called Automotive Mastermind. They're owned by IHS Markit, and we have a bunch of our retailers that are signed up for this service. And it's a tool that sits on the dealer's data management system and also integrates with a bunch of other platforms. And so it basically creates this huge data lake of data, and then can go through and score each of the customers in a dealer's database, and gives them a buyer prediction score based on a whole host of factors. And that tool and tools like it are turning out to be incredibly powerful, because all of the low-hanging fruit is already being done. Dealers already know about how to do email marketing and social media, and they've got their lists, and they know how to do calls and follow-ups and things like that, and they know how to respond to leads that come in. But in terms of actually cherry picking who's most likely to either defect if you don't get them back in the store now, or who's most likely to be willing to repurchase or renew their lease, that's the sort of insights that are coming from these third-party platforms that are integrating, Equifax data and data from your bank and your owner history and your service history, and crashing that all together and creating, like I said, these buyer prediction scores.
Gabrielle, that's your jam, isn't it?
Yeah, I get excited hearing that. But I mean, I agree with Brandon. I think that data set is a game changer. But I think it actually is going to force dealers to change the way they do go to market and the way they do email marketing and those components, just because the one size fits all email is not going to work anymore. And now before they didn't have that richness of a data set to be able to say, I predict that in the example we've been talking about with your purchase, Ann, that we're going to lose Ann, right? And so how do you use that data to start talking to Ann much differently in the conversation, and keeping those buyers with that dealer and that brand? I think on a connected car piece, the thing that gets interesting there, and we're talking a little bit about service, I think it's even just the investment of the vehicle, right? And you think as the bank and the financing and those components, as far as making sure that people are doing those things, to Brandon's point, that check engine light's been on. Let's make sure you get your car serviced, particularly when you return it, to keep that asset at the value it needs to be at, right? I think that becomes very, very interesting to look at. And as that data gets richer, and obviously, I would say owners allow, car manufacturers to use that data more openly. I think it gets interesting to start using it very much like, some of the brands I've worked with in my past, the Dardens, Disney, obviously famous for what they do with Magic Band. That data becomes somewhat of that type of data, where you can start understanding how someone using the car, how they're not using the car, but then you can also map it now to say, how's everyone that's ever driven an X1, how are they driving it? And is Ann driving it like this audience or this audience? What can I learn from them? And that actually enriches a lot of the databases for predictive nature, which is they're not fully using the car the way they should. They're probably not going to like it as much. And so I think there's a lot to do with that data. I think there's a lot of smart people who are going to get their hands on that data and be able to do a lot of exciting things with it, for sure.
I love all the questions over there, but before I hop into some of those, how is the automotive industry thinking about disruptors like Tesla or smaller challengers like Rivian? Brandon, I know you were on the EV side with some of your product launches.
Yeah. I mean, we've obviously focused, we're watching them very, very closely. Tesla, they're a huge player in automotive now. If their price points are certainly luxury. And if you look at luxury car sales and the top 5 selling nameplates in luxury, Tesla has 2 of them now with the Model Y and the Model 3. So, I mean, yeah, they're a legitimate player, and they are not just a niche brand anymore. And I don't think anyone's going to really be able to replicate the success of Tesla, because it's sort of, A, they had first mover advantage. B, they've got this Apple-like cult following, and C, they've got this sort of Tony Stark CEO, and he's got like 30 million, Twitter followers, and he's talking about sending people to Mars. I mean, they're just such a unique company in the space that it's going to be really hard for anyone to sort of knock them off their throne. Obviously, companies like Lucid and Rivian and these other EV startups are going to certainly try, and they're going to try to take a bite out of them. Personally, I know people at both Lucid and Rivian, and I've talked to them, and I've learned more about what their go-to-market strategy is, and they've got some really exciting stuff, and they're definitely ones to watch.
Any thoughts on that, Gabriel?
Yeah, I think the EV space is interesting. Tesla is going to have a challenge, I think, not in selling their cars, but at some point, even though EVs need a lot less hands-on servicing, that model will be interesting to see how that works when the car needs to be serviced, how they're going to manage it. And I know they've worked on processes. I mean, I've read a lot about it. I think it's very interesting. But as they sell more cars and they have more cars to service, how do you manage that? And how do you exceed the expectations, or at least meet the expectations of what your customers now want? I think one thing that's very interesting in reading a lot about Tesla is, and Brandon, you were highlighting that niche that Apple, they get their level of forgiveness from their owner community is greater than probably anything I've ever seen on the automotive side. And the product's great. I mean, so it deserves it, but it almost gets a whole nother halo that's interesting. But it'll be interesting to see how they manage customer experience as it gets past the halo crowd, right? Because it's going to happen at some point. You're going to start, and it's probably happening now, I'm sure. You're going to get past the niche. I'm going to buy a Tesla regardless of what it costs and regardless of what the competition look like. And there's that audience out there. And now people are realizing it's a great product. I'm going to buy it. It's getting more affordable. I'm going to buy it. But you lose that halo a little bit. And so it'll be interesting to see how they manage that as a manufacturer. I mean, I think they're fantastic products, though. So
I want to take Bob's question and field it to both of you. Any advice for a transportation infrastructure owner to prepare for EV? I have a little inside knowledge here, and you can see this on Bob's LinkedIn profile, but he works for the PA Turnpike Commission, which is a closed toll road. So as transportation infrastructure and with investment from the federal government in infrastructure, what advice would you have around preparation for EV?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, Tesla spent all this money developing this huge supercharger network, that spans the, coast to coast to allow people to charge their Teslas on the go very rapidly. And the whole point was to get rid of range anxiety so that people felt like they could take their Tesla on a road trip, and they didn't just need to have a Tesla for their daily driver, but if they ever wanted to take the family, up the mountain to go skiing, that wasn't the car that they could use. They had to still have, an internal combustion engine car in the garage. And and we talked to someone at Tesla recently, and we were talking about charging infrastructure, and what he said is once they started launching cars that had more than 300 miles of range, they started tracking the supercharger network usage of these owners that have these 300 plus mile range Teslas, and they found that those customers almost stopped using superchargers completely. They went from, whatever it was before to using a supercharger 2 to 3 times per year. So, people are just so accustomed to plugging in their phone every night when they go to bed, and they wake up and their phone's got a full charge, and they do the exact same thing with their Tesla, and they just don't ever need, this sort of public infrastructure. So, I saw Biden recently announce that he was, that there's going to be investment for over 500,000 chargers. That's great. It's probably still just a drop in the bucket of what we actually need, but I don't think we need as many as we have gas stations today. Let's put it that way.
Brandon, you hit on a great point though, as far as the location of charging stations and people plugging in like their mobile devices, which is going to happen more and more because the ranges are going to increase. So if you have that road trip, we saw this in travel. Every major hotel brand was bragging that they had charging stations at their hotel for those people who were staying overnight and could charge while they were sleeping, right? Versus having to use the supercharging station. So it's very interesting. I mean, to me, it's a great question because I don't think anyone really knows the answer right now, to be honest, as far as what's needed from there. I would say Tesla probably does, since they have so much data on their cars, and the way when you buy them, they're the one OEM that's like, we're going to use all your data, and everybody's like, yeah, sure, use my data, I'm fine with it. But
I was going to say the exact same thing. All of those insights are going to come from data, right? And how we monitor and how we watch our customers use our products.
Yeah, that takes me to one of the last questions that I have on my list. I want to be respectful of everyone's time too. This conversation could certainly go on for a while. Circling back to data, how do your teams connect data for insights in customer service? Chris had asked an earlier question about what data do you wish you had and you don't, and then what is the impact of leveraging that data? So Gabriel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this ties to automotive, but then just pretty much any other business or brand, is truly getting those touch points or signals, whatever buzzword we want to put on there, but those touch points throughout the journey, right, from start to finish. In automotive, it's very interesting because the sales process is relatively quickly. You think about your ownership cycle, right? So when you own a car, you're going to have it, 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it may be. The purchasing cycle, even if you thought about what car you're going to get for 3 months, is still, it's still a small fraction of the entire journey. And so I think getting data throughout the journey for an owner and how they're using the vehicles and service, how they're using service, how service is working, becomes so critical to making sure that experience is continuously being improved. And I think that's where data becomes interesting. For all those touch points, right? And just mapping out where can we start understanding where we're going to fail in the journey before we fail, and get it to that level of prediction, just like Brandon was talking about using prediction on the sales side. How do you get that on the service side? I think becomes very critical.
Yeah, thank you.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, the auto industry is 100 years old, and so I think it's very operationally efficient. So I don't think there's a ton of big gains to be had, but there's so many incremental gains to be had, so many ways that we can improve. There's so much opportunity, and it's all the stuff that Gabriel was just saying, and also on like you said, on the sales side, on the after sales side, there's incremental gains like all across the business that are all going to come from this sort of data revolution. I mean, one of the things that we just did last year, even though we had froze spending and we were trying to cut costs wherever we could, is, we gave every single employee at JLR got access to Tableau last year. And the amount of stuff that we've done just with basic stuff in Tableau and just visualizing data we already had, but just how can you just even use some of that better?
That sounds super fun. I bet the insights that you're finding there are really neat. I'm curious about Chris Flynn's question here. What happens with federal gas tax? Is that something you're thinking about, or?
Yeah, so federal gas taxes. What's every time we go to the pump and there's, I forget how much it is, 18 cents a gallon or whatever on federal of that cost goes to federal gas tax to be used to put back into infrastructure. Clearly, once you go to an EV, now you're driving on the roads for free. Right. So how is the federal government going to continue to support the infrastructure required without the gas tax? And what does that have to switch to at some point in the future? There's been a lot of proposals that have been talked about, whether it's road use, it's just like which is basically a toll road, right? But some sort of road use tax. Again, this all comes back to data. Now that every car can be, in theory, connected to a cloud, you wouldn't need to go through a physical toll booth to pay a road use tax. You could literally just upload your data to the state of Florida or whatever, and once a month or once a quarter, you would get a road use bill.
Oh, that's interesting. I know there are
who knows,
sensors and IoT devices being placed.
Right.
In order to do that, it would be really neat to have a line of sight to that. I have two more questions for both of you. What are you most excited about in terms of trends on the horizon? If you can paint a picture for us, say the time you retire, not sure how old you are, what do you expect to see in the automotive industry?
Autonomous cars, for one thing. I know it's still a long ways off, but I think that we'll have them by the time I retire. We've got a partnership right now with Waymo, which is a Google company, and they've already got a robo-taxi up and running in Phoenix, Arizona. And they're using Chrysler Pacifica minivans and the Jaguar I-Pace electric car. And, there's a lot more opportunity there. Waymo's got big plans. They are looking hard at Uber and Lyft and seeing where efficiencies can be gained. Obviously, the biggest cost of Uber and Lyft is the driver. And if you can eliminate that cost, that's huge savings for that sort of business. There's a ton of challenges, but there's also a ton of opportunities till you have true autonomous cars. But I mean, if you just think about the opportunities to eliminate all of the things that frustrate us about driving, whether it's, worrying about speeding and getting a speeding ticket, or worrying about some idiot pulling out in front of you in traffic and you getting into a car accident, or you accidentally pulling out in front of somebody else and causing road rage, whatever it is, all of those sorts of frustrations that we face around driving, congestion, drunk driving, the elderly, underage drivers, et cetera, all of that goes away with autonomous cars. So there is a massive opportunity with autonomous cars. That gets me really excited.
I'm only smiling about that because of the scene from Silicon Valley with the autonomous vehicle. Did you see that?
I didn't see it. It's a great show, though. Trace Thomas.
It takes Jared Dunn to a shipping container to a remote island. He can't get out. Anyway, I'm sure we're getting beyond that. Gabriel.
No, I would, building on the autonomous, I think also when we're talking about connected cars in a different meaning cars being able to talk to one another, I think it's very exciting on the efficiencies that can be created. To Brandon's point, right? I don't have to worry about that person knowing how to take an off ramp. It's autonomous. The car can do it, but the car can also talk to my car to say, hey, slow down so you're not having to slam on your brakes. I think gets to a point that's very exciting. Even when you think about EV cars, right? If you think about the goal of EV cars was really to just how to make cars, more efficient and create less pollution, et cetera, et cetera. As they start talking to one another, you get into a position that you can start doing that. And that's exciting. It's going to be based off of, again, Brandon, we'll use your word of data evolution or revolution, but it will be based on data, right? And talking to one another, and just even autonomous is truly based on that. So it's exciting what's going to come.
Awesome. Last question is always book, movie, and podcast recommendations. What are you enjoying? What do you think the audience should digest? It doesn't have to be automotive, just you as a human. Brandon?
The last book I read was Hillbilly Elegy, which is kind of interesting. I read it during the presidential election and just trying to get some more insights into, the mindsets of certain voters. And it's really a fascinating look at, a big slice of America. Movie. I'm trying to think. I mean, the last movie I watched is because my kids wanted it. Is we we rented Black Widow. If you're into Marvel Comics movies, highly recommend. Podcasts. There's some really good podcasts actually. If you're into history, history. I think in how history intersects with business. There's a ton of lessons from history. Not just business history, but just history in general. There's a great history podcast I listen to called Time Suck. So check that out if you're interested. Just fair warning, he does swear quite a bit.
So don't watch with the kids.
Gabriel, your recommendation?
So I've been reading, and I never finished it. So I just started reading in the Ride of a Lifetime, right? Bob Iger's book is like his career at Disney. To me, that was. So many people have said, I read it, and I was like, I spent so many years of my career or working life at Disney and not reading it. I was like, I'll read it. And it was interesting getting his perspective and kind of behind the scenes. To me, was probably the most interesting thing. I've also started going back to an older book, and it's Outliers. I forgot who it was.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you. It's embarrassing to not remember the name considering you have it, but and just highlighting through that again, right? And just reading through the components. It's old at this point, but it's always interesting just to say what was accurate, what wasn't, and what was some of the thinking just to apply things differently. I don't really watch movies, so this is like the perfect summer for sports with the Euro and both my parents being Italian, Italy winning. That was exciting. So soccer, Formula One. Right, we're talking about car stuff, and so it's been a cramped season during the summer, so that's exciting. So I probably spend most of my TV watching time on just live sports at this point. And Tour de France, which I've never paid attention to, and then I was flipping through at one point, and it's just fascinating. So now I watch it in the evenings because during the working day you can't really watch it. But interesting. Yeah. I forgot one of my friends got me into it, and they're like, "Are you checking this out?" And I'm like, "I'm not really interested," And then you start watching, and you're like, "Okay, this is ridiculous."
The story about was Mark Cavendish is really a good one. Thank you so much. Yep. I really enjoyed the conversation with both of you. For those of you who got to join us live, thank you for submitting questions. As always, feel free to connect with me, with these guys. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Anne.